Oh, I think I found the reason. Could it have something to do with big trouble for Team Biden? Last week, we saw a new poll that came out showing that Robert Kennedy Jr. surging in early polls. That poll was among Democrats. And RFK Jr. in another poll at 21%. Other polls have him at 19%. So 21%, 19%. That's terrible news for President Biden. That amount is enough to dethrone President Biden. So, of course, the deep state absolutely does not want this guy on the ticket, does not want to influence an election, be there involved in this in any way, because they need their guy, their deep state puppet, their sort of meat bag, which is President Biden. They shuffle him out for a few hours, and then they give him pump him full
I don't know what kind of meat President Biden would be. He's like that fake plant-based meat.
He's like Beyond Meat.
Yeah.
He's Beyond Meat.
It's like the steak you forgot in the back of your refrigerator that was just sitting on a plate. And it's like
this is a whole meme I just played out in my head, is presidential candidates as meat, and like you have Trump as versed
spam.
I don't know
what kind of meat.
You have Biden as Beyond Meat.
Yeah, you bring Biden out, you inject him full of whatever they inject him with, they shuffle him out for a few hours, and they give him, this is what the deep state wants. So why is YouTube actively going through and like silencing videos? In fact, friend of the show, she's been on the show, friend of the show, Kim Iverson, she got a strike on her channel for an interview that she did back in February with Robert Kennedy Jr. about COVID. She says the powers that be are an intense censorship campaign to protect POTUS now that RFK Jr. is polling at 19%. And of course, I just mentioned a new poll out with 21% among Biden voters and climbing. So she got, and here's the YouTube. This is from YouTube to Kim. Our team has reviewed your content, and unfortunately, we think it violates our medical misinformation policy. So an interview that she did with a presidential candidate who's been an outspoken advocate for health and human rights and people's rights as it related to the pandemic.
Well, he's a litigator, so he's been specifically critical of mandates, how it's cost people their livelihood, and what is the documentation about efficacy about the rollout during the pandemic. Now, those are things that he has copious amounts of data on, and we're going to talk more about what his data is when we talk about ABC. But why then go back months and months and find these videos and remove them unless it's striking a nerve?
Yeah, exactly. And to silence this guy, right? And so these videos, of course, have had hundreds of thousands, millions of views across all of these different YouTubers. Here's another one, Erin Elizabeth from Health Nut News. She tweeted, she said, not only did my interview with RFK Jr. get banned that I did with Bobby Kennedy, but both of us got banned on the same day, along with Joe, a.k.a. Dr. Mercola, and Sherry Tenpenny. YouTube changed their policy just to do that to us, which is why they are currently being sued for it. So, and then another one, not to be outdone, Dark Journalist tweets, so YouTube randomly decided to ban my interview with RFK Jr. from a year ago. I wonder if it has anything to do with him running for president now? So on the same day, YouTube suddenly banned or took down, copyright struck, and just removed like multiple videos. I mean, at least 3 that I know of, 4, maybe more than that I've been able to find. And of course, last week, before all of these interviews started being removed by YouTube, this happened.
And we are honored to have him on our show tonight. He joins us now. Bobby, thanks so much for coming on. So you are, of course, being dismissed as a vaccine nut, but watching your announcement today, it wasn't about pharma even so much as it was about America's place in the world and what do we do about it. If you wouldn't mind summarizing for our viewers.
Yeah, so that happened. So then he goes on Tucker, and then, of course, RFK Jr. then said later after, then Tucker was unceremoniously pushed out at Fox, and we still don't know what exactly happened there. RFK came out and said what? He tweeted and said, well, one day after he has me on the air, Tucker's let go.
Yeah.
Tucker's removed from the airwaves.
There are still some, interviews that I have referred to over the last year or so that are still up. You still can find them. I'm loath to even mention them because I don't want those people to be punished. such as this one, which we've talked about before. But I don't want her to be punished. So you find them. I'll put it in the newsletter tomorrow. How about that?
Okay. Yeah. I mean, this is the problem though, right? So, I mean,
well, and I think
go ahead.
Just one thing that's kind of a positive out of this negative is that if they're doing that, that means they are legitimately scared of him.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like you said, Natalie, he struck a nerve, and it's fear because they don't want him to become more popular by getting more exposure. So that is a positive that he is actually a threat.
But
the same thing happened to Bernie Sanders, though. So you remember
and
now.
Ron Paul.
Yeah. So let's just go wind the clock back a little bit on Bernie Sanders for some context here.
But before we do that, let's think about what tool they have now to punish him in a way they did not have for Rand Paul or Bernie Sanders, which is COVIDism. COVIDism is an automatic flint striker. Was that
a flint striker?
Flint striker, right? Is that
Striker?
how you say it? Flint striker.
Yeah.
Like it will burn. It's a spark that they can punish you with.
Because they have it in their terms of service, right? They can change their policy apparently in one afternoon.
If they'd had that for Rand Paul, or it would have just been. It's a much easier tool to punish with right now.
So let's talk about Bernie Sanders for a second. So Bernie Sanders, you'll recall, was running against Joe Biden, and he was winning, right? He was doing very well in the polls. But MSNBC had a mandate, and we know this because a producer for MSNBC then blew the whistle on this, and mainstream media. They weren't allowed to put him on the air. When they mentioned the presidential candidates, they weren't even allowed to put his graphic up there. Like, what are the Democrats currently running? They weren't even allowed to put him up on the screen. Kamala Harris, though, who was polling way lower, they were able to put her up on the screen. So they put her up on the screen with her number, but they excluded Bernie Sanders from the graphics. Didn't even have him on the air. Wouldn't invite him on for interviews.
There was that one I remember seeing back then when they had like all of the candidates. I think it was after the Iowa polls or whatever, and they had all the candidates up there and what percentage they were at. And like they had Bernie Sanders, who had the highest number, had this tiny itty bitty little graphic to make it look like his big number was smaller because it was in a much smaller space. You remember that, or do you remember seeing that?
Yeah. And of course, Bernie Sanders sold out, and he's part of the problem now. Anyway, voted for war, and so part of the problem. They're all corrupt anyway. So now though, you have RFK Jr., who's speaking out against the powers that be, says he wants to end military bases, U.S. military occupation around the world, bring the troops back home. He wants to prosecute people who pushed mandates and COVIDism on the American people, right? This cannot fly. So of course YouTube swept in, started deleting these videos, copyright striking people, medical misinformation on people like him and others. Really, really awful. And then of course you see this in the mainstream media and the mainstream broadcast media, like ABC News. So ABC News sits down and does an interview with him, and then is caught later admitting that they cut out huge swaths of the interview when he was explaining his position on COVID and vaccines and other things. Totally deleted it, didn't let it air on the show, and edited down contextually what they wanted before they released it. And then after the interview, she comes out there and reads a prepared statement by ABC News, like prepared, I don't know, by their lawyers or some of their big pharma backers. I don't know. But this is what she read after the interview that she did with Robert Kennedy Jr. and had this to say from ABC's corporate. Watch.
We should note that during our conversation, Kennedy made false claims about the COVID-19 vaccines. Data shows that the COVID-19 vaccines prevented millions of hospitalizations and deaths from the disease. He also made misleading claims about the relationship between vaccination and autism. Research shows that vaccines and the ingredients used for the vaccines do not cause autism, including multiple studies involving more than 1 million children and major medical associations like the American Academy of Pediatrics and the advocacy group Autism Speaks. We've used our editorial judgment in not including extended portions of that exchange in our interview. We thank Mr. Kennedy for the conversation.
Okay, well, we should have no faith in that editorial judgment because, one, who's to say they're false claims? She talks about research around hospitalizations and death. We have been seeking out that research. We did their most recent study regarding hospitalizations and death with Dr. Peter McCullough yesterday. Please seek that out. So there are a lot of holes in that. She's just blanketly saying that. She didn't bring her homework. She's just saying this because, her corporate backers are making her say it. But Robert F. Kennedy says, he said this on Twitter when he was referring to this interview, he said, I brought data to back this up. I was willing to show these things. They didn't let me. Do you want to read his statement? Go ahead.
Yeah, he says 47 USC 315 makes it illegal for TV networks to censor presidential candidates. But Thursday, ABC showed its contempt for the law, democracy, and its audience by cutting most of the content of my interview with host Lindsay Davis, leaving only cherry-picked snippets and a defamatory disclaimer. Offering no evidence, ABC justified this act of censorship by falsely asserting that I made false claims. In truth, Davis engaged me in a lively, informative, and mutually respectful debate on the government's COVID countermeasures. I'm happy to supply citations to support every statement I made in that exchange. I'm certain ABC's decision to censor came as a shock to Lindsay as well. And I love that he's giving her the benefit of the doubt because, I mean, I don't know, but she's clearly reading. This is the problem with corporate media, is that she wants her job. She wants to go on The View. She wants to be on ABC. She wants this money. She wants that contract.
Well, let's not say what she wants or how she felt about it.
Okay, maybe she doesn't want the job. Maybe she doesn't want to be on The View.
Maybe in the context
like
of that tweet, when you watch her say that, you wonder to yourself, is she pained to say this?
That's my point. That's what I'm saying.
Not paid.
That's what I'm saying. Well, my point is that at the end of the day, she has a choice. She can walk out of there and say, I'm not reading this.
Sure.
I'm not reading this, and have say, no, I'm sorry, I'm quitting.
Yeah.
I'm not going to read this. But at the end of the day, she sat there and literally read from a teleprompter what they gave to her to say. So she is part of the problem. She could have walked out of there and said, I'm not doing that. And then they would have had to drag or they just probably would have never aired the interview.
They probably would have done that.
Or they had some other lackey at ABC. They got some young person to come on there and just read this, Yeah. Our interview with RFK had just been some low-level news anchor at ABC News they would have shoved on there and who would have been happy to carry the water. So she had a choice.
It's unconscionable to have done. I'm with you on
Would
that.
you? Let me just ask you. I'll ask Philip. I'll ask David. I'll ask you. If you worked at a place like that, let's say you worked at ABC, and you know the research, you know the data, you just did an hour sit-down interview with Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and then you learn that they're going to show only 10 minutes of it, and then you have to read this bullshit disclaimer. Would you read that disclaimer? Or would you walk out?
No, I don't think that I would. And
I 100% wouldn't.
Yeah. And I have had things happen to me like that in broadcast news where your segment is unrecognizable and then you end up in tears. And it's not the piece you wanted to go to air. So you don't have that much control over it, but she did not have to then push she made false claims.
Yeah, that's my point. So she had a choice and she's reading bullshit. She's like literally Ron Burgundy reading crap that they just put in her. I'm Ron Burgundy. Who put the question mark in the teleprompter? You know that he'll read it like a question.
Right.
So David, Philip, you said you absolutely would not have read it. David, what about you?
Yeah, no, there's no way I could. I mean, I would literally, I wouldn't care how much they were paying me. I would say, I'm not reading this. You can pay somebody else to do it. But if this is what I'm going to do, I'm out of here. Like, there's no way I could do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know.
No, I mean, I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't do that if for some reason Clayton asked me to say something on the show that I absolutely disagreed with. I'd be like, yeah, no.
Yeah.
No.
Hey,
Maybe
Philip.
David will, I don't know.
Philip, later today on the show, I need you to say how much you love wearing masks. Okay? You game for that? You game for that? No. You would say, sorry, I'm not going to do that. No, it's not going to happen. So no, she had a choice for that.
Mask.
She had a choice. It was like a Halloween mask. So she had a choice in that. But the censorship didn't stop there. Of course, then Robert F. Kennedy Jr. also on the Piers Morgan show. So the Piers Morgan, I love the name of the show, is Uncensored. And so Piers Morgan cuts him off, calls him names, and he has to justify himself, and he's explaining his position on it. And then, of course, then they have to just shut the interview off. Sorry, we're done. Sorry, we're out of time. We're done. Bye, everyone. Watch.
I'll give you an example. We in our country, we're one of the most heavily vaccinated countries in the world. We also had the highest COVID death rate in the world. So we have 4.2% of the global population. We have 16% of the COVID deaths. That's not a success story. How can anybody point to that and say, the vaccines were a benefit?
Listen, we've run out of time. I certainly don't. Listen, I've got to end it there.
Look, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., we have had 3 years of unchallenged access to feeding people with a narrative that we like better than yours. I'm not going to let you come here